August 2024. The USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group transits the Taiwan Strait, a routine freedom of navigation operation. 60 miles away, the Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy shadows every move with destroyers, frigates, and submarines. Two fleets, both ready, both watching, both waiting. The question isn't if these navies will face each other. Pentagon war games assume they will. The question is, who wins? On one side, the United States Navy, 11 nuclear supercarriers, 70 years of unmatched naval dominance, combat experience from World War II to the Gulf War to the present day. On the other side, the People's Liberation Army Navy, the largest fleet in the world, over 370 ships, built in just 2 decades, an industrial shipbuilding capacity that dwarfs America's by a factor of 200. This isn't the Cold War. This is something new, something more dangerous. Today, we're analyzing the most consequential naval rivalry since Britain faced Germany in 1914. We're running the war games, counting the hulls, and asking the question that keeps admirals awake at night. If it comes to war in the Pacific, who actually wins? To understand this rivalry, we need to rewind to 1996. Taiwan holds democratic elections. China fires missiles into the waters around the island, a show of force designed to intimidate voters. President Clinton responds by sending 2 carrier battle groups through the Taiwan Strait. China has no answer. Their navy is a coastal defense force equipped with Soviet-era hand-me-downs. The carriers pass through unopposed, and China is humiliated. Chinese President Jiang Zemin reportedly asks his military commanders, "Why can't we stop them?" The answer changes everything. Over the next 25 years, China embarks on the most rapid naval expansion in human history. They don't just build ships. They transform their entire maritime strategy. 1996. China operates 2 destroyers capable of blue water operations. 2010. China launches its first aircraft carrier, the Liaoning, a refurbished Soviet hull. 2017. China launches its first domestically built carrier, the Shandong. 2024. China operates over 370 naval vessels, more than the United States, more than Russia, more than any nation on Earth. Meanwhile, the US Navy faces a different challenge. After the Cold War, the fleet shrinks from 594 ships in 1987 to 290 today. Defense priorities shift to counterterrorism. Shipbuilding slows. Maintenance backlogs grow. By 2020, the reality becomes undeniable. America no longer has the largest navy in the world. China does, but does size equal power? That's the trillion-dollar question. Literally. Because if the answer is yes, the entire American strategic position in the Pacific collapses. Let's find out. Aircraft carriers are floating cities, mobile air bases, the ultimate symbol of naval power. The United States operates 11 nuclear-powered supercarriers. Each one displaces over 100,000 tons. Each carries 75 aircraft, more firepower than most nations' entire air forces. Each is protected by a carrier strike group, destroyers, cruisers, submarines, and supply ships. A single American carrier strike group can project more combat power than 70% of the world's militaries. China operates 3 carriers. The Liaoning, a refurbished Soviet-era carrier commissioned in 2012. Ski jump launch, limited aircraft capacity, used primarily for training. The Shandong, China's first domestically built carrier, launched in 2019, nearly identical to the Liaoning, still uses ski-jump launch, limiting aircraft payload and fuel. The Fujian. Launched in 2022. This is China's first carrier with electromagnetic catapults, similar to the USS Gerald R. Ford, not yet operational. Here's the critical difference. American carriers use nuclear reactors, unlimited range, 30 years between refuelings. Chinese carriers use conventional propulsion. They need to refuel every 7,000 nautical miles. American carriers launch aircraft with catapults, allowing fully loaded fighters to take off. Chinese ski jumps force aircraft to launch with reduced fuel and weapons. American carrier air wings include the FA-18 Super Hornet, EA-18G, Growler electronic warfare aircraft, E-2D Hawkeye early warning aircraft, and soon the F-35C stealth fighter. Chinese carriers operate the J-15 fighter, a derivative of the Soviet Su-33, plagued by engine problems and lacking stealth capabilities. And here's what really matters. American carrier strike groups have been conducting combat operations continuously since World War II. The U.S. Navy knows how to operate carriers in wartime. China has never conducted carrier-based combat operations, ever. So in terms of carrier power, it's not even close. America dominates. But here's the problem. Aircraft carriers are massive, expensive targets, and China has spent 2 decades designing weapons specifically to sink them. Here's the most important factor in any US-China naval conflict. Geography. China fights from home. The US fights from thousands of miles away. China's nearest naval base to Taiwan, 100 miles. America's nearest major naval base, Guam, 1,800 miles away. Pearl Harbor, 5,000 miles. San Diego, 6,500 miles. In a Taiwan scenario, Chinese ships operate under land-based air cover. Chinese submarines can return to port within hours for repairs and rearmament. Chinese sailors sleep in their own beds between patrols. American ships, they're at the end of a 6,000-mile supply chain. Every missile fired must be replaced by a cargo ship traveling from the U.S. West Coast. Every damaged vessel must limp to Guam or Pearl Harbor for repairs. China has fortified the South China Sea with artificial islands, military bases built on reefs and sandbars. These islands host runways, radar stations, missile batteries, and deep-water ports. They extend China's defensive perimeter hundreds of miles from the mainland. The U.S. response, attempting to strengthen alliances with Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Australia. But political winds shift, governments change, and none of these nations want to fight China on America's behalf. Here's the brutal truth. In a war over Taiwan, China fights with its entire fleet, air force, and land-based missile arsenal, all within a few hundred miles of home. The U.S. fights with whatever portion of the fleet it can surge across the Pacific, operating far from resupply and reinforcement. This is called home field advantage, and it's massive. Pentagon war games consistently show that the U.S. can win a Taiwan scenario, but at staggering cost. Dozens of ships sunk, hundreds of aircraft lost, thousands of sailors killed. China loses more. But China doesn't need to win decisively. It just needs to make the cost unacceptable to the American public. And that changes everything. In 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy attacked Pearl Harbor, believing they could knock America out of the Pacific in one decisive blow. 4 years later, the Japanese fleet was on the bottom of the ocean, and American carriers ruled the seas. China has studied that history carefully. They've learned that the United States, when fully committed, can mobilize industrial and military power unlike any nation in history. But they've also learned something else. America's commitment isn't automatic. It depends on political will, public support, the belief that the cost is worth the prize. So, who wins a naval war between the US and China? If the question is pure military capability, the United States Navy remains the most powerful maritime force ever assembled. 11 supercarriers, 7 decades of combat experience, alliances spanning the globe, technology, training, and logistics that China cannot yet match. If the question is who wins a war over Taiwan, the US probably prevails, but at a cost that would shock the American public and potentially end US dominance in the Pacific. If the question is who wins without fighting, China. Because every year the US doesn't confront Chinese expansion, China's position strengthens. The artificial islands become permanent. The fleet grows larger. The missiles become more accurate. And the cost of stopping China rises. This is the strategic dilemma. Fight now, while America still has advantage, risking catastrophic war. Or wait, hoping diplomacy prevails, while the military balance tilts further toward China. There's no good answer, only hard choices. The US Navy is more powerful than China's. But power isn't just about who has better ships. It's about who's willing to risk those ships, who's willing to accept losses, who's fighting for vital interests versus who's fighting for survival. China sees Taiwan as a core national interest, worth any cost. Does America? That's the question that determines everything. Right now, both navies patrol the same waters. Both track each other constantly. Both train for the war neither wants, but both must prepare for. The admirals on both sides know the truth. There are no winners in a great power naval war, only survivors. And the real question isn't who has the better navy. It's whether humanity is wise enough to ensure these fleets never have to find out. Because the most powerful navy is the one that never has to fight.